The sun had long vanished behind the rolling hills of Braxton County, West Virginia, leaving the small town of Flatwoods wrapped in a blanket of early autumn darkness. On September 12, 1952, it was a Friday evening that began like any other, with the sounds of crickets chirping and the distant hum of quiet rural life filling the air. Residents were settling in for the night, unaware that something from beyond the stars was hurtling toward them at breakneck speed, tearing through the atmospheric layers with violent intensity. The air grew still and heavy, as if the very atmosphere was holding its breath in anticipation of a terrifying event that would forever change local history and etch the name of their humble town into the annals of the unexplained. Without warning, the sky above the sleepy town tore open with a blinding flash of crimson light that illuminated the countryside for miles around. A fireball streaked overhead, moving with a velocity that defied known aviation capabilities of the era, leaving a trail of sparks and smoke in its wake. It was not a shooting star, nor was it a conventional aircraft, but something far more ominous that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy as it descended. The object slowed abruptly before appearing to crash or land on a steep hill located on the farm of Bailey Fisher, just outside the town limits. The sudden silence that followed the impact was more unsettling than the roar of its descent. 3 young boys named Edward May and Fred May, along with their friend Tommy Heyer, were playing on the nearby school grounds when they witnessed the terrifying spectacle in the sky above them. They watched with wide eyes as the pulsing red light disappeared behind the crest of the hill, and felt a strange vibration rumble through the ground beneath their feet. A mixture of boyish curiosity and primal fear took hold of them as they realized something significant had just landed in their backyard. They knew they could not investigate alone, so they sprinted toward the home of the May brothers to alert their mother about what they had just seen. Kathleen May was busy with her evening chores when her sons and their friend burst through the door, breathless and pale with excitement and terror. They frantically explained that a flying saucer or a plane had crashed on the hill and urged her to come see for herself. Kathleen was initially skeptical of their wild claims, but the sheer panic in their voices and the persistence of their plea convinced her to accompany them. She grabbed a flashlight and decided that it would be safer to have another adult present for whatever they might find in the darkness. She called upon a 17-year-old National Guardsman named Gene Lemon to join their impromptu search party. Gene Lemon brought along his dog to help navigate the dark terrain and provide a sense of security against whatever wild animals might be lurking in the woods. The group also grew to include 2 other local boys named Neil Nunley and Ronnie Shaver, who had been drawn in by the commotion. Together, the group of 7 began the arduous trek up the steep incline of the Fisher farm. The night was pitch black, and the only illumination came from the solitary beam of the flashlight that Jean held in his trembling hand. As they ascended the hill, the air temperature seemed to drop, and an unnatural fog began to settle around their ankles. As they climbed higher, the atmosphere became increasingly oppressive, and a sense of dread began to weigh heavily on every member of the group. The familiar sounds of the West Virginia forest had been replaced by a low humming sound that seemed to vibrate in their chests rather than their ears. The dog, which had been eagerly leading the way moments before, suddenly stopped in its tracks and began to growl low in its throat. Its hackles raised, and it stared into the dense darkness ahead with a look of absolute terror before turning tail and running back down the hill, whimpering into the night. The flight of the animal should have been a warning to turn back, but a morbid curiosity pushed the group forward toward the summit of the hill. The fog grew thicker, swirling around them like living tendrils, and obscuring the path ahead, making every step a potential hazard. A pungent odor began to permeate the air, stinging their nostrils and making their eyes water. It was a smell unlike anything they had ever encountered, described later as a sickening mixture of burning metal and sulfur that made them feel physically ill. The chemical stench became overpowering. As they neared a flat clearing near an old oak tree, Gene Lemon swung the beam of his flashlight across the clearing, trying to cut through the mist and locate the source of the smell. To their right, they saw a pulsating ball of red light resting on the ground, appearing to be a craft of some kind. It glowed with an internal heat that seemed to distort the air around it, like pavement on a hot summer day. However, it was not the craft that would haunt their nightmares for the rest of their lives, but what stood guarding it. Under the gnarled branches of the oak tree, two small points of blue light pierced the darkness, resembling eyes that were observing them with cold intelligence. Jean instinctively moved the flashlight beam toward the twin blue lights, and what was revealed in the illumination caused the entire group to freeze in sheer horror. Standing, there was a towering entity that loomed at least 10 feet tall, dwarfing the men and boys who stood trembling before it. The creature had a blood-red face that appeared almost mechanical, encased within a pointed hood or cowl that gave it the shape of the ace of spades. The face possessed no nose or mouth, only those glowing circular eyes that projected beams of pale light, which seemed to bore into their very souls. The body of the entity was dark and shadowy, appearing less solid than its terrifying head, but clearly structured and imposing. It seemed to be wearing a dark pleated skirt or robe that hung from its waist down to the ground, concealing any legs it might have had. The upper torso was thin and robotic, with short appendages that ended in claw-like fingers, which twitched menacingly in the dim light. creature did not stand on the ground like a man, but seemed to hover inches above the grass, supported by some unseen force that defied gravity. A shrill hissing sound erupted from the monster, similar to a high-pressure steam valve being opened, and it began to glide toward the group with smooth, silent motion. The entity did not walk, but floated directly at them, covering the distance with alarming speed, while the red light of the craft pulsed more violently behind it. The smell of sulfur intensified to a suffocating level, causing Kathleen May to gag and cover her mouth with her apron. The sheer alien nature of the being shattered the reality of the witnesses, sending them into a state of primal panic that overrode all rational thought. The terrifying encounter reached its climax when the creature lunged forward, and the flashlight dropped from the shaking hand of Jean Lemon, plunged into near total darkness, with the glowing eyes of the monster advancing upon them. The group broke their paralysis. Screams tore through the night air as they turned and scrambled down the steep hillside in a desperate bid for survival. They stumbled over rocks and roots, tearing their clothes and bruising their bodies. But the fear of the unknown horror behind them drove them onward. They did not stop running until they reached the safety of the May household, where they collapsed on the floor, gasping for air and shaking uncontrollably. Kathleen May immediately contacted the local sheriff, Robert Carr, and the owner of the local newspaper to report the incident. The group was in a state of shock, with some of the boys vomiting and others complaining of a burning sensation in their throats and nostrils. The physical effects of the encounter were immediate and undeniable, serving as proof that they had come into contact with something toxic and otherworldly. Sheriff Carr and his deputy arrived quickly, but by the time they reached the house, the mysterious lights on the hill had faded. Despite the terror of the witnesses, the lawmen were skeptical, but agreed to investigate the site to put their minds at ease. They climbed the hill armed with shotguns and lanterns, but found no sign of the 10-foot monster or the glowing red craft. However, the air still held a lingering trace of the metallic burnt smell, and the atmosphere remained heavy and unsettling. The next morning, the light of day revealed strange physical evidence that suggested something heavy had indeed rested on the hilltop. Lee Stewart, a writer for the Braxton Democrat, discovered skid marks in the tall grass and a deposit of an oily, gummy substance that no one could identify. The grass in the area was flattened, as if by a great weight, and the peculiar smell still clung to the vegetation. This physical residue suggested that the encounter was not a mass hallucination, but a tangible event involving a physical object. News of the Flatwoods monster spread like wildfire across the country, capturing the imagination of a nation already gripped by UFO fever. Reporters from major newspapers and radio stations descended upon the small town, turning the quiet community into a circus of media activity. The witnesses were interviewed repeatedly, and their stories remained consistent in every terrifying detail, despite the ridicule they faced from skeptics. Kathleen May and the boys described the spade-shaped head and the glowing eyes with a conviction that unsettled even the most hardened journalists. The United States Air Force took notice of the incident and dispatched investigators from Project Blue Book to interview the witnesses and examine the site. The government official inquiry attempted to explain away the event as a meteor sighting combined with the misidentification of local wildlife. They proposed that the monster was merely a barn owl perched on a high branch, and that the glowing eyes were simply the reflection of the flashlight. This explanation was met with outrage and disbelief by the witnesses, who knew the difference between a bird and a 10-foot-tall mechanical horror. The owl theory failed to account for the intense physical sickness that plagued the witnesses in the weeks following the encounter. Several members of the group suffered from swelling of the throat and irritation of the nose, and lungs similar to the effects of mustard gas exposure. The vomiting and convulsions they experienced were consistent with radiation poisoning or exposure to unknown chemical agents. Kathleen May required medical attention for her throat, which remained inflamed for days after breathing in the noxious mist. Skeptics argued that the hysteria of the moment caused the witnesses to exaggerate the size and shape of an ordinary animal. They claimed that shadows and fear played tricks on the mind, transforming a simple owl into a monster from outer space. However, the sketch artist who worked with the witnesses produced a drawing that looked nothing like any known animal on Earth. The rigid mechanical shape of the head and the distinct lack of natural features pointed toward something engineered rather than born of nature. Reports of other strange sightings in the area began to surface, adding credence to the idea that West Virginia was a hotbed of extraterrestrial activity. A mother and daughter in the nearby town of Frametown reported seeing a similar entity just hours before the Flatwoods incident. They described a creature with the same glowing eyes and foul odor, suggesting that the monster may have been traveling across the state. These corroborating accounts made it difficult for authorities to dismiss the event as an isolated case of mass panic. The psychological toll on the witnesses was profound, as they were forced to relive the trauma every time they were asked to tell their story. Some of the boys suffered from nightmares for years, waking up screaming about red eyes watching them from the dark. Gene Lemon, the young National Guardsman, was deeply affected by the event and avoided the woods he had once roamed freely. The community of Flatwoods was forever branded by the legend, and the hill became a place of fear for local children. As the years passed, the legend of the Flatwoods monster grew and evolved, becoming a staple of American folklore and ufology. Researchers analyzed the soil samples from the site, but the results were inconclusive, neither confirming nor denying the presence of alien materials. The oily substance found on the grass had evaporated or degraded before it could be properly tested, leaving only the testimony of the witnesses as proof. The lack of hard evidence allowed skeptics to dismiss the story, but the conviction of those who were there never wavered. The timing of the event during the height of the Cold War led some to speculate that the craft may have been a secret Soviet prototype or a failed U.S. military experiment. The proximity of West Virginia to key industrial and government sites made it a plausible location for testing advanced aviation technology. If the monster was indeed a man-made machine, it would explain the metallic appearance and the chemical exhaust fumes. However, no government agency has ever claimed responsibility for the device or the creature. Others believe that the entity was a biological being wearing a pressure suit or protective armor to survive in our atmosphere. The description of the pleated skirt and the cowl suggests artificial clothing rather than biological features. The gliding motion could be explained by a personal propulsion system similar to a jetpack or anti-gravity device. If this theory is true, it implies that the visitors were not merely observing, but were prepared for interaction in a hostile environment. The incident at Flatwoods remains one of the most compelling close encounters of the third kind in history due to the number of witnesses and the physical effects they suffered. Unlike many UFO sightings that involve a single person in a remote location, this event involved 7 people ranging from children to adults. Their shared experience and consistent testimony make it difficult to dismiss as a hoax or a delusion. The fact that they gained nothing but ridicule and suffering from their story adds weight to their honesty. Today, the town of Flatwoods has embraced its dark legacy with a museum dedicated to the monster and signs welcoming visitors to the home of the green monster. Tourists come from all over the world to stand on the hill where the entity was seen and look up at the stars. But for the remaining families of the witnesses, the memory is not a tourist attraction, but a scar on their history. They remember the fear in the eyes of their loved ones and the sickness that lingered long after the lights faded. The true nature of what landed on that hill in 1952 may never be fully understood or explained by modern science. It exists in the gray area between folklore and history, where facts are blurred by the fog of time and fear. Whether it was a visitor from another world, a secret military experiment, or a demonic manifestation, remains a subject of fierce debate. But the image of the spade-headed phantom with glowing eyes continues to haunt the collective consciousness of West Virginia. Recent investigations using modern equipment have attempted to find traces of radiation or anomalies in the soil at the Fisher farm. Some ghost hunters claim to have recorded electronic voice phenomena and strange magnetic fluctuations in the area. They believe that the encounter may have left a permanent scar on the fabric of reality, creating a portal for other entities. The hill remains a place of high strangeness, where the veil between worlds feels dangerously thin. The Flatwoods monster stands as a chilling reminder that we are not alone in the universe, and that our visitors may not always be friendly. The aggressive posture of the creature and the toxic nature of its craft suggest a threat rather than a diplomatic mission. It forces us to question our safety and our place in the cosmic hierarchy. If such a being could appear in a quiet rural town, it could appear anywhere at any time. The story serves as a warning about the fragility of our perception and the suddenness with which the unknown can intrude upon our lives. One moment, we are safe in our homes, and the next, we are face to face with a nightmare from the void. The witnesses went up that hill looking for answers, but they found only terror and confusion. They learned that some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some paths are better left untraveled. As night falls over the hills of Braxton County, today the locals still cast wary glances toward the sky. The wind whistling through the trees can sound like a hiss, and the lights of a distant plane can look like glowing eyes. The fear that the monster might return lingers in the shadows of the subconscious, passed down through generations. The silence of the woods is no longer peaceful, but pregnant with the threat of what might be watching. The Flatwoods monster is more than just a story. It is a psychological ghost that haunts the history of the region. It represents the ultimate intruder, the violation of the sanctuary of home by an alien force. It taps into our deepest fears of the dark and the unknown shapes that lurk within it. Even after 7 decades, the image of the creature remains as potent and terrifying as it was on that September night. We may never know what Edward May Fred May Tommy Hire and the others truly saw in the mist, but their terror was real, their sickness was real, and the change in their lives was permanent. They looked into the abyss, and the abyss looked back with glowing blue eyes. And somewhere out there, in the infinite darkness of space, the thing they saw may still be gliding through the void, waiting for its next destination. The legacy of the Flatwoods monster is a testament to the enduring power of the unexplained to captivate and terrify us. It challenges our understanding of reality and forces us to confront the possibility of life beyond our planet. It is a story that refuses to die because the questions it raises have no comfortable answers. It remains an open wound in the history of ufology bleeding mystery into the modern world. So if you ever find yourself driving through the winding roads of West Virginia at night, keep keep your eyes on the road. Do not look too closely at the dark tree line or the strange lights that might appear on the horizon. For in the heart of Appalachia, there are things that defy explanation and monsters that do not belong to this earth. And the Flatwoods monster may just be waiting in the fog for someone to come looking again. The encounter ended as quickly as it began, but the dread it instilled has no expiration date. The witnesses have largely passed on taking their full memories to the grave, but the horror they unleashed remains. The hill stands silent, now reclaiming the secrets of that night under layers of leaves and time. But the soil remembers the weight of the craft, and the trees remember the hiss of the machine. In the end, the Flatwoods monster is not just a tale of aliens, but a ghost story of the highest order. It features a specter that creates physical harm, a haunting that occurs in the wilderness, and a demon that wears a mask of metal. It blurs the line between science fiction and supernatural horror, leaving us in a state of unease. It is the ultimate campfire story, because it might just be true. As you lay in bed tonight listening to the settling sounds of your house, remember the people of Flatwoods. Remember how their ordinary Friday night turned into a lifetime of nightmares. Remember that the barrier between safety and horror is as thin as a beam of light in the darkness. And pray that whatever is watching from the stars decides to keep its distance. The fog still rolls in thick over the hills of West Virginia, hiding the landscape in a sea of white. Within that mist, anything could be hiding, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The Flatwoods monster may be gone, but it is certainly not forgotten. It waits in the pages of history and the corners of our minds, forever watching with those cold blue eyes. The universe is vast and full of terrors that we can scarcely imagine, let alone comprehend. The Flatwoods monster was but one glimpse into a reality that is far darker and more dangerous than we dare to admit. So when you look up at the night sky, do so with caution, for something might be looking back down at you, preparing to descend.